Welcome back to Come Follow Me. This is the Book of Mormon year. It's such an exciting text. It's my favorite book in the entire world. I've said in other videos I read a lot of books, but the Book of Mormon is absolutely the most beautiful book, most engaging book, and of course, the most correct book that I've ever read. And it draws us unto Jesus Christ, and it reveals to us the covenant path. And the covenant path is the way that we can find our way back into the presence of God. Now, we're going to spend time throughout this year reviewing the covenant path because it's so essential to our salvation. And the scriptures are very clearly constructed around this covenant path. And remember, there's two elements to the covenant path. There's God's obligations, and those are best expressed in the Abrahamic covenant. And you can review those stories in Genesis chapters 12 through 25. And just real basically, when you think about the Abrahamic covenant, it's actually God's covenant to Abraham. So in a way, it's a misnomer. I love the title Abrahamic covenant, but it makes us think about Abraham instead of God. And it's actually God's obligations. It's what God is supposed to be doing, what he's covenanted to do, which is to give us posterity, property, or promised land, priesthood, and prosperity. And the word prosperity means to have his presence with you. And then what he asks us to do is he reveals the commandments. He revealed these at Mount Sinai to Moses and the children of Israel. And the commandments are the covenantal instructions that we are all supposed to live to show our love and our loyalty back to God. He's loved us. This is how we show our love to him. And if you read the Book of Mormon and the Bible through this lens, and if you look for what is God asking us to do, that is our covenantal obligations. And when you see God acting, you can often understand it best through the Abrahamic covenant or the Mount Moriah covenant. So when we get to 2 Nephi, chapters 1 through 5, what we actually have in the first 4 chapters is Lehi as the great prophet of this tribe that he's led out of the land of Jerusalem into the new promised land. He gives his last will and testament. Now, this is very significant. Throughout the scriptures, when a great leader is about to die and there'll be a transition to a new leader, the leader will often talk about the things that matter most and give final word and counsel to his people. And we see that happening with Lehi. And if you go back and look at the Old Testament, we have the same thing going on. Moses, for example, his last will and testament is the entire book of Deuteronomy. Right? He knows he's not going to go into the promised land. He's about to die, and he gets onto another mountain, not Mount Sinai, and he delivers the commandments or the Mount Sinai covenant yet again to the people, and lays out to them, if you're going to get into the promised land and occupy it and have all the blessings that God promised to the fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, here are the things you have to do. That's all of the book of Deuteronomy. Well, we also have similarly when Joshua is about to die, and he says, choose ye this day whom you will serve. That statement comes from Joshua's last will and testament, the final speech that he gives to the people before he dies and then leadership transitions to somebody else. The prophet Samuel does a great speech. In fact, the people wanted a king. Remember, there was all this era of judges. And Samuel was the last judge. And the people said, we want a king. We want to be like all the other nations of the earth to take us up to war against other nations. And the people forgot that God is the king, and he's the divine warrior that will fight their battles. He's the one who prospers them and empowers them. But the people said, no, we want our own human king. And God said, fine, I will give you a human king. And we'll talk in future videos about what God expects of a king. And Samuel, one of his final speeches, laid out all the problems of human kingship. And we'll see in future videos that human kingship often is the cause of entire populations going apostate and leaving the faith and also leaving God's covenant. So this is what a last will and testament is about, is the great words of a great leader, a great prophet, inviting people back into the covenant or reminding them of their covenantal obligations to God. So with that background, we should expect Lehi as a great leader who's fully within the Mosaic covenant, and he totally understands what God will do for the people if the people are faithful. God willingly and fully offers all these things, and the door is always open, but we have to walk through that door by keeping the commandments. So our access to the Abrahamic covenants is based on our faithfulness. Now, the Abrahamic covenant is freely offered, but are we willing to accept it? And we show that acceptance by keeping the commandments God has delivered. And this is what we see Lehi talking about. He reviews with his family the basic commandments that God expects for people to live, for them to live in peace and prosperity in the land of promise. And I'm going to read just a few verses here from 2 Nephi chapter 1, verse 5. And Lehi said, "Notwithstanding our afflictions," remember they had all these difficulties getting over to the promised land, "we have obtained a land of promise, a land which is choice above all other lands, a land which the Lord God covenanted with me should be a land for the inheritance of my seed." Now remember, on God's covenantal obligations is to offer promised land to his people. And that he shows loyalty by doing that, loyalty to us. We return our love and loyalty by keeping the commandments. And so we should expect to hear Lehi talking about what are our covenantal obligations so we can live in peace and prosperity in the land. And he goes on and says, this is verse 9, "I, Lehi, have obtained a promise that inasmuch as those whom the Lord God shall bring out of the land of Jerusalem shall keep his commandments." Okay, so we got the land. Here's what we need to do. This is our obligations. We got to keep the commandments. The commandments are the instructional manual for how to keep the covenant and how to be in the covenant path. And he goes on, "Those who keep the commandments, they shall prosper upon the face of the land. And they shall be kept from all other nations, that they may possess this land unto themselves. And if it so be that they shall keep his commandments, they shall be blessed upon the face of this land." So he just says this again and again. Keep the commandments. If you keep my commandments, ye shall prosper in the land. That statement is the summary of our obligations within the Mosaic covenant. Now, there's more that we could read here in 2 Nephi 1 through 5. But my invitation for you, as you read these chapters, listen for how Lehi is inviting his family to keep the commandments. Furthermore, you might look for what exactly is he teaching his family that the commandments are. And most importantly, the covenant path is basically bounded by these two mountains, right? The Mount Moriah, Mount Sinai. And Jesus is the path. And so one of the most important things that we could do to reveal the covenant path is to reveal Jesus. And we're not going to spend a lot of time on this because I want you to spend your time reading the scriptures and getting into the scriptures. Sure, videos can be a lot of fun, but God did not reveal me, right? He revealed the Book of Mormon for you. And so my invitation is turn this video off, get back into the scriptures, and look for the covenant path. And let me just read really briefly one small but powerful element where Jesus is revealed as the covenant path. And it's about Jesus Christ, 2 Nephi chapter 2, and it's in verse 6 and 7. "Wherefore, redemption cometh in and through the Holy Messiah, for he is full of grace and truth. Behold, he offered himself a sacrifice for sin, to answer the ends of the law," or the purposes of the law. And the law, again, is the covenant. "Unto all those who have a broken heart and a contrite spirit, and unto none else can the ends of the law be answered." If you remember, at Mount Moriah, Abraham was supposed to sacrifice Isaac, and God stopped him and gave him a lamb. That lamb was what was provided by Jehovah. Jesus is the covenantal lamb that's provided to bridge the gap between these two covenantal mountains. As we keep the commandments, we can partake of the sacrifice of Jesus Christ and receive all that the Father hath given us. So again, my invitation to you is, as you read these chapters this week, look for the covenant path. Look for what God does for us within the Abrahamic covenant. Look at how he wants us to be loyal to him and faithful to him. And then look for how does Lehi reveal Jesus, who is the path.